Good afternoon. We're joined today by three wonderful panelists with the topic being financial empowerment for Hispanic entrepreneurs, Hispanic businesses. I'd like to take just one quick minute and tell you a story of a Dallas-based entrepreneur, a Latino, who drove all the way to Palo Alto and to San Francisco to raise capital. He didn't fly, he doesn't like to fly, and he went up there and he went all over up and down Sand Hill Road trying to raise money, and everyone shut the door behind him. And he's really frustrated. He's walking up and down the beach, and he kicks the sand, and out comes this bottle. He opens the bottle, and a genie comes out. And the genie says, "I'm the genie of the bottle, and you have one wish." The guy said, "Well, I thought I got three." He says, "No, you only get one wish, so make it a good one." So he says, "I'm really frustrated. I really thought this was the place where I had to come and really talk my game up and raise some money, and I've got all these great business ideas. I'm poised for growth." And it didn't happen. So instead of that, I always thought I wanted to go to Hawaii, but I hate flying. So I wish that you would build me a bridge so that I can drive to Hawaii. And the genie says, "You gotta be crazy. You know how much cement and the environmental impact that's gonna have? Just the amount of time it's gonna take, you have to really think of something different. I don't really do this very often, but you have to come up with a second wish." And the guy says, "Well, I really try to understand and get into the minds of the funders and how to access capital, and I couldn't. So why don't you help me get into the mind of how I ask and position my business for funding?" And the genie thinks about it and says, "This bridge you want it one lane or two lanes?" So it's a real challenge for every entrepreneur to really understand what they spend so much time on. So I'm really just grateful that we have a great panel today that we're going to talk about some of these aspects. And we'll start with, where are we now? Where are we now with respect to financial empowerment as each of you sees it? And we'll start with our friend down there at the end, Regina.
Well, thank you so much, and what an honor to be with all of you this afternoon. Thank you again. Well, as we think about these issues, I've been particularly involved here in our Dallas area, and I have a lot of numbers that I could share with you. And even in the last panel, you heard some of the issues, some of the educational barriers that we have, but clearly the issues of capital are a big problem. But I want to focus in on something involving Latinas. Many of us, when we think about some of those dates in the year, how long does it take a woman to be able to earn as much as a man does in a year? And it comes usually in April, and we have a big celebration then. For African American women, that date is in August. For Latinas in Dallas, that date is in November, because Latinas are making 38 cents to the dollar. That you might see with a white non-Hispanic man. And so some of these are some of the very basic issues that we have to confront with respect to entrepreneurship, because we can talk a lot about being able to access capital, but I think one of the comments that was made in an earlier panel, and that was, you don't even know what you don't know. Those are some of the issues that we have to confront when we're particularly thinking about the entrepreneurship and the opportunities that we see. And that's one of the basics. And I would have to tell you, just to give you a level set on this, that in a city as wonderful as we are sitting in Dallas and the opportunities, we still have almost 13 to 14% of Dallas that has a 9th grade education or less. So these issues that you just confronted a few minutes ago will still be an issue as we speak about entrepreneurship, because there are some systemic issues we have to deal with.
Thank you for that. Edgar, you deal a lot with small businesses and also
Yes.
Latino-owned businesses, and helping them find ways to access capital.
Yes.
What are some of your thoughts?
Well, I want to share a personal story. I came here when I was 10 years old in 1993. And my dad opened his first business in 2001. And my dad's method of getting funding, was he put my older brother and me to work from the age of 13 up. And he would take one paycheck for them and leave us with one paycheck. And so from about 13 to, I would say 17, 18, he did that. And we never got a return on that investment. Not directly, but as I work with some of the Hispanic community, primarily in Seattle, I'm finding that they're a lot better at saving money but we still lack a lot of the education as far as developing relationships with financial institutions and how to prepare ourselves to receive funding well in advance. So in my opinion and my experience is that even though there are more of us, or more Hispanics that are American born, we still come from the same parents as I did.
Got it. Thank you for that. Roy, you're at the Federal Reserve Bank. Tell us from your vantage point, what are some of the challenges that we're facing now, how we got here with respect to financial empowerment?
Sure. Thank you so much, Beto. Let's see. Okay, I think that's on. Is that on? Yeah, I mean, where are we at now? I mean, that's a real fundamental question. The Federal Reserve being the keeper of your economy, we really look at this data. And in many ways, there's a lot of urgency that needs to be addressed. We need more disruptors out there. We talk a lot about the Texas miracle, and we're currently experiencing 3.4% unemployment. Lots of people from California, lots of people from New York moving into our state. Our energy sector is doing well. But when you disaggregate the data, when you start looking deeper at the numbers, a real story starts emerging, particularly for our African American and Latino populations. You start looking at unemployment. You start looking at wealth numbers. I wanted to share a couple of things with you. As an example, wealth inequality is prevalent. The white population has wealth of $170,000. In comparison to Latinos, it's 20,000. So huge gaps, huge disparities there. Regina mentioned income. 70,000 for whites, 50,000 for Latinos. Let me ask you this. This one, the ones that really astounded me. So being in Dallas, looking at the average wealth of a Latina in Dallas. Anybody love to take a guess? It ain't good, guys. It's in the negative. These are powerful numbers, and when you start digging deeper into these numbers, we have some real cracks and real headwinds for our Texas economy. Number one in childhood poverty, number one in childhood uninsured rates. These are cracks in our economic system that need to be addressed, and we need more disruptors like you guys in the audience that can continue to fight and bring this data to the top of people's minds.
So let me string this together because I think it's an important narrative. Even if we go back to my hokey story of this guy trying to raise money in the Bay Area, right? There's a misinformation of where capital is and how you can access it. And Regina brought up some shocking statistics with respect to the percentage of income that a Latina would make in Dallas. But that doesn't mean that things cost 38% for that person.
Right.
They still cost 100%. And so when Roy talks about being underwater with respect to wealth creation and income, it's very jarring. And Edgar points at a lot of ways of how we as Latinos insulate ourselves with respect to income growth, right? Because we rely on related resources that we put outside of the formal economy. So in many ways, we're at a state of crisis with respect to wealth creation. Where do we go from here? How do we help Latino entrepreneurs, Latina empresarias? How do we help them access capital, but also access the kind of information or education they need to manage that?
I've really appreciated the work of some of the organizations like a Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, or in this case, Regional Hispanic Contractors Association. I was the vice chair of the DFW Airport Board, and you can imagine with an airport the size of DFW, the kinds of construction projects that are on. But one of the issues that confronts so many as they're thinking about getting into this kind of work is that you have to be able to bond. You have to sort of have money before you can make money. So what's important for us is that we are there and we are advocating for those that can be those disruptors that we've just heard about. And that means making, for example, bonds smaller so that people can then qualify, or contracts smaller. We have to think about ways that we can do business differently, because when you're talking about a population that is the majority population in states like Texas or California, we've got to be sure that the next generation has the ability to be able to get that education, to be able to create the wealth. So we've got to think in different ways of how we're going to make things smaller in ways that we can qualify as well. And I would encourage us then to be supportive of those organizations that are also creating relationships. I'd love the question that was asked just a little bit ago about the students that drop out of school because they think they're going to be able to become the next Bill Gates who did that. But what you don't remember about that is Bill Gates' father was an attorney with a huge law firm and was able to provide extra resources for him as well. But Steve Ballmer, who was the number 2 person, he stayed in school, and you create those relationships. That's what's so important about trying to be an entrepreneur. You've got to create relationships. And then when you do create those relationships, don't forget where you came from, because you need to be that person who creates and offers relationships.
So this is where I like the story of the genie, because I do believe that there is a bridge that needs to be built between the everyday Hispanic and the organizations that are able to provide funding through education. So we need to talk to that genie again.
Absolutely. Different genie for sure.
Yeah.
Roy?
In many ways, there is a bridge. There is organizations called Community Development Financial Institutions, commonly referred to as CDFIs. And they're this bridge between capital and banks. In many ways, we have a strong infrastructure here in Dallas. I'll give you a couple of names that you might recognize. People Fund, Acción Texas, Lift Fund, BCL, Texas Mezzanine Fund. So these are organizations on the ground working with those that may not have the credit, may not have the wealth, may not have the experience, but holding their hand and getting them to a place where they need to be in order to push their entrepreneurial dreams. They are wonderful organizations, hand-holding individuals, organizations, getting people into the entrepreneurial world. Sometimes you go to a bank and it'll take 2 days to get your loan. But with a CDFI, perhaps you're not ready. And it might take 5 months. It might take a year before they're ready. But what they're doing is they're working hand in hand with them on their financials, on any legal issues, on any workforce issues, on their QuickBooks, on their business plan. I mean, the reality is that you don't know what you don't know. And the business world is filled with so many of those pitfalls. But if you have a mentorship relationship, if you have an organization that stands by your side, and they do exist, guys, they do exist, what we need to do is scale those organizations up, create more acciones, create more lift funds, create more people funds, because the reality is that too many people don't know about these resources that do exist. They're too quick to go to the banks, get turned down, and shut it down. Or go to an online lending source, pay 500% interest, and their business will spiral out, and you're out of business.
I would just follow on something that Roy said that was so important, and that is the scalability of these programs that work. And this is where you all can be so helpful. Organizations like Acción Texas, Lyft, these programs, these are actually nonprofits. And these are organizations that need your help and support to grow. And the way we do that is that we absolutely bring them up as those organizations that we are going to put as the first organization that we're going to help, because we know $1 there will mean $10 to others going forward. And I know I was very involved with a couple of those organizations and having actually an event, and Eva Longoria came and was actually the person that was really pushing those because she knew that sometimes those smaller loans, that extra $2,000 and $3,000 and $5,000 can mean all the difference in an organization that is going to succeed. But this is where you can be helpful too and support those nonprofit organizations so that they can scale, because we have too many organizations right now that are too small and they're not being able to make the impact that we need for our huge numbers that we're talking about.
Great feedback. I mean, what we're talking about here is really highlighting what already exists, helping them scale so that they can help the other businesses scale as well. The other aspect is we're already hearing some creative solutions to the financial empowerment and access to capital issue, for instance, on the bonding issue and the like, and there'll be some time for Q&A at the end. I'd like to shift a little bit and talk about how technology is impacting both the Latino entrepreneur, but also the access to capital or wealth creation paradigm.
I guess I can take this one. So in many ways, it's like we got to go back to the basics here. And I want to talk about something that is not often talked about when we talk about technology and entrepreneurship. And this is the digital divide that we see in our communities. And I'm going to be real honest with you. You go to a community like Pleasant Grove, South Dallas, Oak Cliff, there are areas where broadband access is very limited to non-existent. You come onto this beautiful campus at SMU and you got 5 bars. You go to some areas of Pleasant Grove, no bars. Well, what does that start doing? What does that start doing to a person's psyche in terms of getting them engaged in an entrepreneurship activity? So when you overlay broadband access with where Latinos and African American lives and reside and work, they're not the same map, guys. They're different. And this is a real issue. You start talking about, we take internet access for granted, but in too many of our communities, and the Federal Reserve has been done a ton of research in this area, Dallas is the 6th least connected community in the country. We're right there with Detroit and Cleveland, not exactly where you want to be. So we have some real challenges there. And this is a problem that we can solve. We can solve this. We're in the heart of AT&T. And so there is a lot that can be done in terms of connection, broadband access, homework gaps. I'm driving through South Dallas, and I see a group of kids with their backs against their school. And I had to get down. And I asked them, what are you guys doing? And they said, we're doing our homework because this is the only place I can get internet access because it's not available in my home. Those are the challenges that we're seeking. If you want jobs, if you want to do your homework, we take it for granted. But there are too many communities that don't.
And think about that entrepreneur that wants to get something in, but they live in a part of town that doesn't have a Starbucks, that doesn't have these places. They live in food deserts and restaurant deserts. And so to that point, you're supposed to be on time, get your materials in, and you have nothing available near your home to use those wonderful iPads that you may even have been given at school because you don't have Wi-Fi. So you have to travel somewhere else just to be competitive with that other person who might have the benefit of living in an area that provides opportunities for them to snap their fingers and get the work done.
Yeah, that was a great point. In addition to that, in the small business sector, one of the things that I notice is that not only access to internet or fast internet, but additional technology that will help them run their business in a much smoother way that will help expansion. And I mean, down to iPads, down to understanding how they can use that. For us, an iPad is so, 10 years ago. Yeah. But for a lot of these businesses, they're not having the access to understanding how they can use this basic technology to grow their business or to establish it. I think in addition, because of access to internet and education, we are not, at a small business level, we're not being very creative about the types of businesses we launch. And I think that because of that, we push very heavy to brick and mortar, which limits our ability to get the funding that is currently being offered more accessibly. And so, at least again, in my experience in the Pacific Northwest, we don't come across a lot of Latinos that have an interest in a technology business. And I believe it's because of that access to that education.
I mean, this to me is like preaching to the choir. It's very revealing, right? To see that a whole population could be disenfranchised, from accessing.
And they tend to be in minority communities.
Thinking about technology, the Latino population, access to opportunity, where should we be, say, in 5 years? Where do we need to be? What would be a good measure of we're making strong progress?
Well, we're Latinas are not in a negative mode after working 2 jobs, and working, 2 30-hour-a-week jobs because they don't provide benefits. But I do think that it's really important for all of us in this room, but outside this room. Because when you think, and we heard some of the numbers that Ana mentioned earlier about our median age of the Latino population, it is clearly the future of Texas, clearly the future of California, clearly the future of many of our states and of America. So we have to provide the infrastructure and get that infrastructure in place for the success and to ensure the success of those that are following us. And that will mean that we've got to be better about equity issues, including those in technology, including those that provide opportunities for people like child care subsidies and facilities, and being able to have many of these other infrastructure ideas that so many of us take for granted, but are not a possibility for too many in our communities, those communities of color that are currently living at a lower rate than white non-Hispanics. So for us to have real measures is that we have to do some equity measures and say, where are we in terms of being able to have savings? Where are we in terms of being able to get our educational levels up from where they are right now? And certainly you heard some of the issues in STEM. 1% is not acceptable for our community going forward, period. Not for our communities, but for the community at large. So I think being more honest with ourselves on some of these equity measures and really getting those numbers out and shining that light is going to be key.
Where should we be in 5 years? I really, one of the things that I really liked that you mentioned was our responsibility to support these organizations that are existent at a small scale so that we can scale them and reach the community at a broader level. I think, leaving this summit, that is one thing that I'm going to be incredibly committed to in looking for these organizations and doing my part to expanding. I think that from seeing, again, small business owners, education, access to that education. I think in our phone conversation, we talked about even a business plan. So if these organizations exist, what can we do to bring them to the broader community? In my opinion, that would be a great success in 5 years.
Yeah, in 5 years, I think we can close the digital divide in Dallas, in Houston, in our other communities. That is achievable. The second thing is scale up our community development financial institutions, these non-bank, nonprofits. As advocates in your community, continue to volunteer, continue to serve on their boards. If we have more faces that look like us, there will be more of an emphasis in serving people that look like us. So that's critical. And the third thing I'll say is we have got to elevate our workforce. As the pace of disruption in terms of as we need more workforce, we've got to elevate our workforce in such a way that workforce training becomes more and more critical. One of the top issues impacting small businesses today is, of course, one, access to credit. But the second one is a gap in qualified workers that can grow and expand their businesses. So we're seeing this huge gap existing and occurring within our small business communities. And if we can close that gap through training and education, and the pace of which technology is moving, creates this more need for an educated workforce.
This is really, again, eye-opening. You should know that the Bureau of Labor Statistics and the Small Business Administration define a small business as an entity that employs 500 people or less. There are 28 million small businesses in the U.S. 7 million of those businesses are one employee. It is a huge component of our economy. Yet, as highlighted by the panelists, we have a challenge with the workforce, and dare I say that the Latino workforce has a challenge as well. When 1 in every 2 new startup businesses, according to the National Report on Early Stage Entrepreneurship, put out by the Kauffman Foundation in 2017, 1 in every 2 new businesses is started by a Latino or Latina. 1 in 2 businesses. In 1996, that accounted for 10% of new startup businesses. Now, that's 24%. However, those starting the most businesses out of need have a high school education or less. Those starting a business out of having recognized an opportunity have a college degree. I'd like to open it up now for some questions because I'm sure that maybe some of the items that were drawn up have instigated a few thoughts in people's minds. Back here, the young lady.
Good afternoon. Pleasure being here. My name is Natalie. I'm a business consultant, and I used to work for People Fund as a business consultant as well. And I understand that there's the situation is mainly in underwriting, the terms of credit, collateral, and the guarantee as well. So, in the cash. So those are exactly the reasons why people go to a financial institution. And there's not really a solution for these people but to have them for a week, waiting for a response that anyways ends up being negative. So how can we convince underwriting to benefit or slighten a little bit more for the, maybe, today we're speaking about the Hispanic community, but actually it's for the entire community of small business owners. So what suggestions would you bring into the table for those type of situations? How can underwriting do a change, or is there anything that you may know that would be beneficial for underwriting to take under consideration? Because actually that's the fact. That's the fact.
Yeah, I mean, that's a tough question, and in many ways you really can't. Even a nonprofit is in it to not lose money. And banks are certainly a business in and of themselves. It really comes down to financial education. And it really comes down to the hand-holding that a bank or a community development financial institution or an SBA or a local chamber in not quashing those dreams. At sometimes it's no now. But it doesn't mean that it's not going to, it won't be yes 6 months from now. You got to work toward improving that credit, improving that savings, getting that business plan to where it needs to be. Because nobody wants to invest in a business that is not going to be profitable going forward. So changing the dynamics, that's a tough one. Now, there are some things that you can do in terms of alternative credit. There are some organizations out there that look at, there's Experian and some of the other credit bureaus. They're very strict, but there are some other credit bureaus that will look at things like your rental history, how long you've lived in the country, your business idea. It's a little bit more flexible, but we have to elevate and get them to where it becomes a win-win for both parties.
Today I can't be heard. So is there a solution that you guys can, since you are the ones representing the financial institutions right now, is there a way you guys can get them to have the message of, they have many educational centers for the community? Because I used to be, I opened one. So is there a way that they can center the education between collective, small entrepreneurship? Let's say, if you have your supporter or your supplier or another business that may be an indirect competition, is there a way that we can reunite them all together to go forward as a collective, maybe community of that business, and not fail them just individually, but maybe as a collective? I don't know if I'm getting myself understood here. So like a group, making them,
Like insurance, I guess.
Like a collaborative approach, a
maybe
co-op?
incentive that a little bit more into the public instead of announcing, yes, with the financial products. Instead of that, instead bringing in the incubators a little bit more into the promotional systems. And that will change maybe the mental situation of having the financial support. Yeah. So what I've seen that has been really helpful and has worked in some parts of the country, and we've seen one that has worked here in our Dallas area, in southern Dallas, which is one of the incubators that has been set up with support from corporate America as well. And in those incubators, part of what occurs is exactly what Roy is saying. There are certain rules one must follow. It's like if you want to go to college. You have to take certain courses, you have to take certain tests, you have to fill out certain forms. It's still the same thing on this because you have certain standards that have to be met, and it could be some of them governmental, for example, where you don't have a lot of leeway. But what I think is important is that we've got to be more and more supportive of some of these incubators as well. And the ones that I've seen that have worked, and it's called Redbird Mall in our area, that had that support and that had that exact knowledge that it's sometimes those entry-level issues that prevent you from getting to that second and third level. And if you could just get some support and help in those, that would propel you, and then the incubator, has been very successful. So I would encourage you to take a look at what your community is doing with some of those. Sometimes they're community colleges, sometimes these are collaboratives that have worked with corporations. But I think that there are certain realities we have to think about, and how do we provide opportunities to lessen the obstacles so that the realities can be met.
I'll add real quick that there's a financial technology company in a different state that uses machine learning to basically, and it's designed just for Latino businesses. It goes into the bank account with the consent of the business owner. Within 10 minutes, it could tell them exactly how much they could bear in terms of a loan. And it will tell them why they can't take the larger loan. It'll give them a path as to when that can be paid off so they can come back for a larger loan. And that organization works with a number of institutions as a mechanism to employ mentorship, employ real data to create a pathway. And it has to work with organizations that are already existing in certain communities. Otherwise, that model does not scale. Other questions? Right here.
Hey there again. So I think that throughout the day and throughout a lot of these conversations, there's a lot of nuances which require uniquely Hispanic leadership to get to the heart of it and to solve it. This finances and education, I'd say, are two in which we share some commonalities between the Black and the brown community. What are the opportunities here, and what have you guys seen where partnering together on this issue has proven to be more successful than trying to go kind of independent paths here?
I'll start here. One of the things that we're doing in Utah, in the Salt Lake City area, is we're working with an institution and going out to the community and letting them know that they need to start building relationships well in advance. And so these institutions are helping them learn before they get to the need what they should be doing to prepare. And so that's the approach that we've taken to reach a little bit further. And so far, it's worked out really great because we've been able to identify small businesses that have up to $200,000 in cash that oftentimes is not even in their bank account. And so that education, that connection is something that we've been trying to do.
Well, a city like Dallas has been a majority-minority city now for decades. And the program I just mentioned at Redbird Mall, which is in southern Dallas, is actually started by a couple of African Americans who have had great support from corporate America, but they recognize that they want to work with people in the community. And when 2/3 of the community is, 42% Hispanic, 25% African American, these are great opportunities to provide huge changes in the community for the entire city. So they have been they have done particularly great work in recognizing that the issues that we're talking about affect many communities of color. And they have been particularly sensitive to these issues that occur for both. There may be some language issues that occur with some of the Hispanics, but the education issues, the issues of access to capital, these are all issues that transcend these communities of color. And they transcend the communities of color because I'm afraid to say that those economic numbers that we were talking about in terms of savings reflect those for both African Americans and Hispanics. So it's critically important that these organizations that are community-based provide that opportunity for all communities of color, and I'm really thankful to this incubator that's in Redbird doing both.
Thank you for that question. We probably have time for one or two more. Let's go over here. Up here and then over here.
Hello, my name is Jorge Aguirre. I'm president of Optimal Business Solutions. We're an executive search firm. And DCA Professional Search is also a multicultural executive search firm. And I'm going to blend in last episode with this episode too, but my question to you, or multiple parts of the question, I'll reveal the red elephant in the room, is coming from the last episode, we were talking about the students, now we're talking about the businesses as it relates to Hispanics applying for loans. And we're using, something we do is follow the push, pull, and put system, right? So 80% of Americans, we try to push all our skill sets in our inventory of things that we can do, right? Skills and experience. Whereas companies use the pull system to say, these are the job requirements, and we will only pull in the candidates that meet these requirements. Out of those, 75% use an applicant tracking system that is unbiased. It filters out based upon content of the resume. Got it, right? 25% is left. 21% of that is filtered out by individuals, by human resources, who may or may not have biases. And only 4% of those actually go to the hiring manager. So what we try to do is assure that we can bypass or assure that in your resume, your skills and experience of inventory they're relevant to the job. But there are, in this situation with you guys, and the university here too, is any university, it doesn't matter how many students start a university, it matters how many students finish. That's a question. That's the question that should be asked. How many students finish? So with that in mind, out of all the applications for funding, what percentage of is there any measurement that you guys know of that says, hey guys, we're going to measure what percentage of the people that applied, of all the people applied, the Hispanics, so that it's that the same percentage applies to the Hispanic applications versus any other market applications. Do you understand my question? It has to be fair, so that if you're passing, 30% of loans that get approved, right? Then wouldn't it be fair that the same amount should be across the board? It doesn't matter. See, Hispanics, we do not go into any job or any place thinking that we're going to diversify ourselves, or we're going to be alienate ourselves or diversify ourselves. We're American, period. We don't think, well, I'm going to go and apply. If we have the same skill sets and the same education as anybody else and their brother, we should be included, not excluded because of the color of skin.
So if I understand your question correctly, it's, is there any measure that says applicants in, whether for a loan or what have you, should have the same shot, regardless of ethnic background or what have you, as whatever, proportionally as the applicants that come out?
Exactly.
It's complicated. I happen to be privy to some data where even if they're all Hispanic applying, there's many reasons why they might fall out of the funnel with respect to a loan application. I think it's a complicated component. I'm sure there's other areas in perhaps the country or whatever where there's different challenges, but that's just my opinion from the panel.
I think, though, that one of the things one must ask when you have a situation, let's assume that you're finding a smaller percentage of Latinos or African American companies getting the loans vis-a-vis a white non-Hispanic. What then has created that anomaly? And I think that's where we have to be really vigilant and say, if there is an anomaly, is it because there's an education issue? Is it because of lack of dollars going in? That's why I was mentioning that question about bonding. One of the things that we discovered is that the size of contracts was an obstacle for smaller emerging companies to be able to bid on. And those smaller emerging companies tended to be companies that were being run by people of color. So what we did then is split those out so that they were smaller contracts, and this would give the opportunity for those smaller emerging companies to grow and be the big companies that can get the largest contracts. So I think it's really important for us to remain vigilant and say, what is it that's creating the obstacles that do not allow us to succeed, and not assume that we have to put a round peg in a square one and say, instead of doing that, let's make it so that we can have more people qualify and eliminate the obstacles that are creating the reasons that people aren't being able to succeed. I'd like to see it turned that way as we review the kinds of statistics that we're looking at.
So it sounds like we're at a stage where we're poised for growth, but we have some homework to do, right? We have some challenges, but the good news is those challenges, by and large, have been identified. We know we need more access to broadband. We know we need more collaboration. We know we need to find ways to scale, and we need to use the bridges that already exist and help them grow. Do we have time for one more question?
Why don't you actually again respond the question to the panel so that we can lead to the conversation of what's your bird perspective? What would be the one thing, if you would be the James, what would be the one thing what would be the one thing that you think would change the access to wealth and financial, empowerment for our community?
Creating more savings for individuals. Because I think when you start with money, it is so much easier to borrow money. Yeah. So we need to start with more savings. And there are a lot of things that will provide those opportunities, better education, better kinds of jobs, not jobs with benefits. But you have to start with an ability to have savings that will create those opportunities then. So for me, it would be access and having the ability to save.
For me, it's access to education. All of these programs that we talk about that you guys have here in Dallas, being able to scale those programs, in my opinion, is the key. I do find that education is the biggest barrier. And at the stage these entrepreneurs are in, it's never too late, but they are much busier than the younger Latinos to be going to formal education, to college, university, or advanced programs. And so being able to give them access to that education at their level.
I would relook at some of our policies. The Federal Reserve is not kind of the leader on policy issues, but monetary policy issues, but really looking at policies that impact wealth accumulation and asset building. Things like intergenerational wealth, policies related to minority and women-owned businesses, looking at loan guarantee programs and how people can access those in a more efficient way and more equitable way. I would really look at our key policies that impact entrepreneurship, and let's take a second look at them and see if there's ways that we can increase access.
I would say that we need to look at alignment of our decision making. And what I mean by that is, how do we make decisions as a family, as a business, as a community, and as an overall structure to help and grow, because Latinos will make up the largest proportion of the middle class. And if we're not saving, we're not educated, we don't understand the policies, our middle class is in trouble.
Great. So, okay, so thank you, everybody. Help me say thank you to this incredible panel.